everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. We have so many people from the community who come on, and today we are so lucky to have Tucker Barrett on. Many of you might know him. I just discovered him, and I'm very happy to have him on the show. Tucker is a master of designing, building, restoring, and repairing stringed instruments, for those of you musicians out there. He's built custom guitars for many musicians over the years, including such luminaries as Lou Reed, Pete Townsend, and Andy Summers, and was an early creator of electric violins, violas, cellos, and also hybrid instruments, which are incredibly cool looking. We'll show some cutaways of those. These days, he's busy repairing or restoring vintage and contemporary instruments at his studio right here in Brattleboro. Welcome, Tucker.
Thanks for having me.
It's very exciting to have you on the show.
Thank you.
And as I said, you know, it's just so much fun to keep discovering people in this town who have done really fun things.
I agree.
Yeah, or just plain interesting things. You did not grow up here. You grew up on Cape Cod.
I did till my teenage years, although my grandparents lived here in Brattleboro.
Did they? Where did they live?
They lived on North Street, just across from the park.
Yes. Yes.
Up the top of Main Street.
Yep.
And I started coming up here from the time I was 3 or 4 years old.
Really?
And came up here quite a lot in the wintertime to go skiing. My parents were very active early skiers. Come up here and stay at my grandfather's house, and we'd go skiing at Mount Snow usually.
So you'd go to Mount Snow, and this was 60s.
Very early 60s,
yeah. So this is before the deluge.
It was before the deluge. You know, I think it cost maybe $3 or $5, but we always had season passes. My grandfather was a president of the Vermont National Bank back then, and he helped with the financing of Mount Snow to get them started, and as a result of that, our whole family had free season passes for years and years, so it made it doable. I loved it. So I was skiing like by the time I was 4.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Living on Cape Cod and being a skier, that's pretty cool.
It was great. It was a nice upbringing for sure.
And when you were growing up, were you interested in music or art or various things like that?
I was interested in music, but I wasn't handy with my hands. My parents in general were not inclined that way. They weren't mechanical in any sense, so there was no tools around the house. But my father had played piano when he was younger. He played like ragtime piano. And, you know, so there was some influence. From a pretty early age, I remember my first instrument was trombone. And my parents liked big band music. Yeah. And I thought trombone was pretty cool. And I used to go marching around the house trying to play to like Arthur Fiedler, you know, pop stuff.
Right.
So I had some, but I wasn't immersed in it by any stretch.
What were you listening to, music-wise?
At what age?
Well, I was going to say, as a teenager.
As a teenager, you know, the Rolling Stones, the Doors, the Beatles, of course, Bob Dylan. Creedence Clearwater, all of them.
All the usual suspects.
All the usual suspects, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's who we heard. That's who was on the radio.
Exactly.
You know? I used to go to bed with the radio on during my teenage years, so all of that is embedded in my brain.
I still listen to a lot of the same stuff today.
Yeah, I know.
I still love it.
I think we all do, yeah. Those of us of a certain age.
Yeah.
And then you went to Dublin School for high school?
For my last 2 years, junior and senior year of high school, I went to Dublin School. I left the Cape. I really wanted to get off the Cape for a variety of reasons. Mostly my high school was just a zoo, a big regional high school in Hyannis. And so I was lucky enough to be able to go to Dublin School. And there was like 60 students there. And it was great.
Was it co-ed then?
Yes. Yeah, it was co-ed, and it used to be a very formal place, suits and ties, and very conservative. But over the '60s they changed.
That's right.
And when I got there in the early '70s, it was not like that at all. It was pretty liberal, and I skied a lot, both cross country and downhill, and hiked a lot. I mean, it was right at the base of Mount Monadnock, and in Dublin Lake, which was was just a really great
Beautiful.
place to be.
It is a beautiful spot, yeah.
And I loved, they were good teachers there, and I played a lot of sports, and I was just outside all the time, and it was really a good thing for me.
Healthy. Sounds real healthy.
Yeah, much healthier than what I was doing on the Cape.
And you went to Marlboro College.
I ended up going to Marlboro College. That was my big, upgrade in population. I went from 60 students to about 160 students. But it was a familiar format. It was also a beautiful place on a hill, and I liked the philosophical setup of the course of studies up there, and they had some amazing teachers of all sorts, from the classics to woodworking to painting. I mean, it was really good back then.
One of your instructors was Gib Taylor.
Yes, yeah, I was lucky enough to meet, and really he befriended me in a lot of ways, and he was a real mentor.
Yeah.
And very, although he was sort of above where I was at in many ways, he's kind of an abstract fellow in a lot of ways. And in retrospect, I wish I had been a little bit more advanced when I started working with him. I would have understood more, but I got it. Some of it I continued learning, absorbing from him years later. It would go, I remember when Gib was trying to teach us that. And, but he was great. He taught a color seminar, which taught a lot about how colors interact with light.
Yes.
And I did do in woodworking. I was interested in what he was doing sculpturally. But I wasn't, I'm not, to this day, I have no touch with painting or drawing or any of that world, but I saw a lot of what Gib did.
Yeah, and he introduced you, it sounds like, to 3D, using wood as sculpture.
I was playing quite a bit of music myself, and at Marlboro, and even taking courses with Blanche Moyes. She taught she actually had started off her life playing classical guitar. And of course, who was her teacher? Segovia.
Right.
Right? So I was doing classical guitar with her, and I was trying to play banjo, and I needed some instruments, and Gib offered this design class, and he had built some guitars, and that just kind of clicked with me. So I built a banjo, a dulcimer, and then I started building acoustic guitars, and I got so intrigued and excited about that slowly turned into my major at Marlboro, which was not unheard of, but unusual. And that progressed through my graduation there, where I was building, starting to get okay at it. And that led to my whole career path, really. When I first graduated from Marlboro, my first real job, which I was lucky to get, was with a furniture maker and a wood sculptor who were both RIT graduates, and they were looking for kind of an apprentice worker, and that was over near Woodstock, New York, and I worked there for a year and worked a lot, every day on big, large-scale wood sculptures, smoothing them out and sanding and scraping. It was really gritty, hard work. But I enjoyed it. I was learning a lot. So I did that for a year, but it started to get to be tedious. I probably would have stayed with it, but they happened to know my eventual mentor and employer, which was Ken Parker, was a friend of theirs, and he had taken a position at this store in New York City called Stuyvesant Music, and he was looking for an apprentice. And they suggested to me that I go down and visit with him, and I really almost didn't go because the draw to New York City was not. I was a country kid, and it was kind of intimidating to me. But I went down and met him. And we liked each other, and he offered me the position, and I just was like, well, you got to go for it, and I did, and that really was the best move I ever made, really, career-wise.
He was already pre-established, right? As
to some level,
yeah.
to some degree. He wasn't that well known in New York, but he was building amazing archtop, very contemporary, futuristic designed archtop guitars, and was getting some notoriety with, some of the big players in New York, jazz players mostly.
Jazz, okay.
Yeah. And so that was very interesting to me, and that was what that was the draw to get me down there, was to learn repair work, but also to study with him building acoustic archtop guitars. It didn't really turn out that way so much. We ended up, because we were working for the store, was paying our salaries. The store wanted to build custom electric guitars and basses, and eventually the electric violin thing. And we ended up building all these exotic, more electric instruments than acoustic archtop guitars, but it was all still very exciting and new to me, and I was learning a lot of good skills, and even though it wasn't quite what as advertised, Ken and I were both really pretty happy and excited having the opportunity to build anything, and get paid for it.
Right, because he started out just doing guitars, and then the whole culture was shifting at that. This was the 80s.
This was the 80s.
In New York City.
In New York City.
So you're getting all kinds of elements starting to come together, including disco, I believe.
Including disco. To my horror, we dealt with a number of disco groups. The biggest one being Chic, which was pretty big back then. It was Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards, and they were the top of the game, and they wanted any number of different custom instruments, and we were happy to do it for them.
Did they have a sound in mind that they were after?
Yes and no. They were frustrated with they were actually touring with a string section with, violins and violas and cellos, and along with their disco thing, which is kind of a weird combo, but that's what they were doing. And they were very frustrated with trying to amplify the acoustic violins. They were playing in big stadiums, and they just couldn't get the volume they wanted, and also they wanted a visual presence, something different. And that's when we started fooling around with acrylic as a material, clear acrylic, and finding that it actually amplified with transducer pickups that we were working with, worked quite well at loud volumes and looked fantastic on stage. So they were very excited about that.
Because they would light up.
They'd light up,
right?
but people would. A lot of stadium music at that time, and right through the 80s, was as much visual as it was tonal. People would see these, clear 5-string electric violins, and they just go, "Wow, what is that?" And we were the same. We were like, "Wow, this is cool."
Yeah.
So very different than wooden archtop guitars, but very intriguing. And it was there wasn't much going on in that field, so I was intrigued with it, and Ken was intrigued with it, and we kind of took off with it, and that brought some notoriety to the store, and it kept evolving. After a few years, Ken went off on his own to pursue his archtop guitars, and
went back to that.
I was still at the store and building different custom electric guitars for like Andy Summers, or we had commissions from a number of different groups like that, or Lou Reed was all those people were in New York or touring through New York and would come to the store for both repair and ordering instruments. So we were busy throughout that period.
It sounds like during that time, though, that you and Ken were very open to exploring these new avenues of sound. And I'm wondering, again, someone would come in and they would say, "We're looking for this kind of look, maybe this kind of sound." Did you have to really shift gears to do that?
Yes, it was way out of my comfort zone. I mean, just being in New York was way out of my comfort zone in many ways. But it was exciting to me, and I just was like, sure, I'll go there. I was learning and exploring as much every day as
Yeah.
the people that wanted us to build the stuff.
Yeah.
So
did it take a lot? Did you have to go through a lot of iterations before you came to a really good design and good sound?
yeah, you definitely have to you go through prototyping, and there's a lot of failures, both structurally and tonally.
Yeah.
And the electronic pickup systems back then it was a very early time in the development of those type of electronics.
Yes.
There's a company called Fishman Transducers down outside of Boston, and Larry Fishman is the owner of it. And back then he was just a guy in his basement making some upright bass pickups. And I went to him, and we worked on different prototypes, and he eventually developed a violin transducer, which he still uses today. So I was fortunate to hook up with different people that were interested in it as well.
Yeah.
I was always tweaking materials, changing materials and different combinations, and trying to work with, at the same time trying to make instruments, or with the violins in particular, things that would create that sound but also be light enough.
Right.
Everything that makes a good acoustic violin works against it when you're amplifying it.
You showed me, and we'll show the audience, about the double violin.
The double neck violins.
Yeah, that you created.
That was probably the oddest or most extreme version of that I ever made.
And that was Indian music.
The first one, which Ken Parker designed primarily, the whole setup of it, was 2 acrylic bodies, 2 5-string necks, one down the bass range and one in the normal violin range. And he would use the bass one as sort of a drone that Indian music often has, sympathetic strings. And it takes a really good player. I mean, this El Shankar was the Indian artist we worked with, and he was beyond anybody that I had ever heard at that time.
Is he still around playing?
Oh yeah,
he is.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he plays. I'm not quite sure what he's involved with these days, but he's an active musician.
We think he's related to Ravi
He's
Shankar.
his nephew, I believe.
Yeah. Quite a family of musicians.
Oh, unbelievable.
What I noticed, just doing a little bit of research, there are a lot of women who are doing electric violins.
Even back 20 or 30 years ago, there were a number of really good female violin players, which, they came out, a lot of them came out of the classically trained, and rock's easy if you're a good classical violin player, and groups wanted, it was kind of nice to see and to hear females, and traditionally,
That's right.
a lot of rock groups, and even today, a lot of bands are, it's male dominated, which is kind of, it's a little bit boring in its way.
Right.
And I was thrilled to work with a number of really good female players.
Yes.
One of them being Miriam Sturm, I worked with a lot, who still plays with John Mellencamp, who's still around, out touring. I mean, he must be in his late 70s, I'm sure. And he's still out there, and they're a great band. And she was fantastic.
They're rock and rollers don't die,
No, well, some of them
Except
do.
really early.
Yeah.
Did you tour with bands?
No.
You didn't?
No, I was never a tech.
So you weren't an on-call kind of guy?
No, although I did used to be a little bit on call, that I would meet a group, like John Mellencamp's band in Boston before a show. If I was bringing her a new instrument, or just to come to, they'd invite me to come to a show, and I'd get backstage passes, and I could bring friends and family,
Nice.
It was great.
And what was that like for you to be like in the wings, watching your instruments being played?
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's you're building, and they can become kind of an object.
Yeah.
And to actually hear them being used and see, in application,
Right.
both visually and just watching the crowd react to it. I mean,
Right.
that would feed me to keep me. If I was making a stack of violins, I was kind of getting into some level of production, small production, and it could get tedious. They could just, you can kind of forget what they did. So it was a treat for me to leave Vermont and go down to New York City or go to Boston, or I'd be out in Los Angeles doing trade shows and get invited. You know, I mean, it really was flattering and, you know, fed my ego a little bit and, you know, gave me a purpose.
Absolutely. I love your point, though, that you're talking about seeing them breathe life, you know, breathing life into these instruments after you've made these objects,
It's really fun.
When you say that you set up guitars for, like you did for the Pretenders, the Police, the Cars, Foreigner, Joan Armatrading, what does that mean to set up the guitars?
They would come in quite often before a show, like at Madison Square Garden or something, and, you know, they'd have, Foreigner would have like, you know, 10 or 12 guitars. And they just want us to go through them, restring them, check everything out, get them all tuned up and ready. You know, kind of like tuning up cars, really, before a race. You know, I mean, you're just kind of going through and making sure nothing's going to fail, and just giving them the security of knowing they're going to get out on stage and nothing's going to crap out on them or be out of tune or. You know, any of those issues. So our shop was sort of one of a few go-to places for many of those groups of that time. Which was, you know, I love that.
That must have been pretty fun, yes.
You know, as a 23, 24-year-old person who was into rock and meeting a bunch of your heroes, it was pretty exciting. Setting
up for a lot of these groups, I know that a lot of it was rock and roll, but you also had other genres happening, and the spectacles that started taking place, you know, with a lot of fireworks or a lot of, you know, all of that stuff. Any in particular that stand out?
There were a few, but one that was really contrasty to me was I was working with a player named Doug Hamilton, who was from Nashville, and he was in Barbara Mandrell's band. And, you know, I wasn't that into Barbara Mandrell, but, you know, she was top of the heap as a country artist back then. And they were playing at Mohegan Sun down in Connecticut, the casino. And he invited me to come down. And, you know, he didn't tell me much what was going on with it. So I got there and I went to the show, and it was a very fancy club part of the casino. And as the show started, her group was all young, male, handsome hotties, you know, I'll call them. And as Doug was, and he opened the show. As the lights came up, he was on a kind of a hydraulic lift. And the show started with him just playing solo violin, but he had one of my blue neon plexiglass violins, which was pretty out for country stuff back then. And they were all in tuxedos, and they had the dried ice machine, you know, the smoke machine and all the lighting. And the show started with him coming up on this hydraulic lift about 20 feet in the air, just, you know, playing the heck out of this violin. And, you know, it was mostly an older crowd, maybe a little bit conservative. And, you know, it was so funny just watching people's mouths drop open. And I was just laughing.
You come back to Brattleboro. I think you mentioned your wife kind of rescued you from New York City.
She did. It was time for me to leave. It was taking a toll on my physical and mental health. And I was kind of jaded on a lot of that scene by then, after 4 years of it. And we had an opportunity to come back originally to Putney, and had a beautiful shop space for both of us to work in. Some friends of ours had bought the old gazebo property right across from the post office in Putney. Catalpa House, which was a wonderful, you know, it was a great opportunity for us to get out of the city and not have to have all the money to, you know, try and buy a place, which we didn't have at that time at all. So it was great. We both had a nice opportunity to have studio space. And I was still building a lot, but I started doing more repairs locally for a store called Retro Music down in Keene. And then eventually Maple Leaf Music here in town, which I became very close with. And we eventually moved from Westminster, from Putney to Westminster, and then to Brattleboro eventually. So we've been in Brattleboro for about 20 years now.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention also that your wife, Beth Armour, is a ceramicist.
She is.
And quite an
good.
accomplished.
Yeah,
yes.
she's great. And we've both been each other's muses.
Nice.
For, we've been married for, our anniversary's in a couple weeks, and 41 years.
Yeah.
And, we met at Marlborough College, and we've been together ever since.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah, and she does wonderful work, and has a studio at our house as well as mine, so we're both, we're both right here in Brattleboro and really content. She's semi-retired.
Yeah.
I'm just tired, is what I tell people. So I'm pretty active doing repairs all the time.
I wanted to just take a moment for you to give a shout out, I guess, to the other guitar makers in the area. Very well known, Michael Gurian, Froggy Bottom
Michael
guitars.
Millard from Froggy Bottom, and Andy Mueller is also the other partner in
That's right.
Froggy Bottom, and I'm close friends with both of them.
You are,
in fact, I used to work part-time with them for a number of years, mostly to get out of my own shop and have the camaraderie.
Yes.
Michael Gurian was an early mentor of mine, and still a very close friend, although he moved out to Seattle. Michael Millard used to work with Michael Gurian. In fact, got trained by Michael Gurian down in Soho, down in in the 60s.
Oh, really?
And then they moved up here. The whole crew moved up here to start Gurian Guitars in Hinsdale.
Yes.
So that was they were both early proponents of custom acoustic guitar making.
And they were both mainly acoustic, is that right?
Yeah.
Completely acoustic?
Yeah.
And was Maple Leaf, which used to be on Elliott Street, was that a hub for you guys as well as for the public?
Yeah.
People would meet up there and hang out?
No, Maple Leaf was, they were there for, Kate Spencer owned it for 35 years, and she carried Froggy Bottom guitars. She was actually trained by Michael Gurian. She became a banjo maker, and she was quite a good musician, and she was a major Martin guitar dealer, and it was definitely a hub.
Yes.
And I miss it.
Yeah, and I'm thinking too that for all of you guys, you have become collectible. I've noticed. You can go online, and you have a wonderful signature. That
thanks.
You put on your instruments.
Oh, my logo.
Yes.
Yeah, my Beth designed that actually, and I've been using that from.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot of mileage out of that.
As well, you should. Gee whiz, Tucker, this has been fun.
Yeah, it's been great.
We could talk for a little bit longer, I think.
Well, especially about the repair stuff. As I evolved out of building into repairs. I really treasure what it took me a long time to realize was that, working for the rock stars and whatnot was all fun and interesting.
Yeah.
But, it was way back, it was 40 years ago, 40 years ago.
Right.
And I've come to treasure the people I work for around here. And, most of them are less renowned, but equally as good or better than any of the musicians that I used to build for. I really love work, a lot of these guys, musicians I've worked for, and gals, I've worked for doing repairs for 30 or 40 years too.
Yeah.
And, we've become friends.
Right.
In all different genres, all different levels, from little kids up to serious pros.
Yeah.
But I really treasure that.
Yeah. Who could ask for more, right?
Right. I mean, we have our lifestyle, and we have friends, and I offer, I like to feel that people value my work. Here it keeps me going to just keep people's instruments up and running.
Yes, yeah.
And I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah, we've got so much music in Brattleboro.
It's a treasure.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
It is. How many people are tucked up in the hills around that many people would never be aware of, but they're so talented and they're so nice. I mean, that's, in New York, I worked with a lot of people that weren't that nice and were very egotistical, and they had their own sets of problems just like everyone else, but they had fame and they could be nasty and unappreciative and disrespectful. And that used to trouble me.
Yes.
It was one of the reasons I wanted to come back up here.
I can understand that, yeah.
And now here in Brattleboro, I love the people I get to work for. And I still love this, from a little kid to
Yes.
now. I didn't really plan to come back to Brattleboro. It wasn't a conscious plan, but here I am.
Here you are. Thank you so much.
And here I'll stay. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks to all of you folks out there. We're all lucky enough to hear these stories from Tucker and his world of making guitars and other instruments. Stay tuned. We will be back next time with someone from the community. And the information at the end of the show will be there if you want to get in touch with Tucker for any reason. Thanks so much for being with us.